The wind came down hard off the ridge, carrying sand and sorrow in equal measure. It howled across the plains like some lonesome beast, rattling shutters and chasing horses into the far corners of Raven Hollow. The town sat like a faded stamp on the hide of the New Mexico territory, tough, sun-bleached, and mostly forgotten. A single dirt road carved its spine, lined with tired buildings that sagged under the weight of years. Dust clung to every surface, and what hadn't been weathered was rusted. Clara McKenna stood in the doorway of her barn, watching the horizon darken. She wore a faded calico dress and a black scarf tied at her throat, though the morning had long since passed into something quieter. Her hands, rough with calluses, held the bridle of her husband's horse, an iron-colored gelding named Ghost. He was a proud, scarred beast, with one ear chewed short from a dogfight and a gaze that missed nothing. Clara had buried James 3 winters ago, dug the hole herself when the fever took him before the doctor's wagon could. Folks in town had offered help, but not their eyes. They didn't look at her the same after. A woman running a ranch alone unsettled them more than any coyote ever had. She led Ghost into his stall and patted his neck, her fingers lingering in his coarse mane. The barn smelled of dust and cedar shavings. It was quiet, but not still. Something in the air curled wrong, like a coiled wire waiting to snap. The silence broke with the thunder of hooves. Clara stepped out and shaded her eyes. 5 riders came fast over the rise, trailing dust and menace. At their center rode a big man in a red duster, long and mean-looking, with silver buckles down the front and a rifle slung casual across his back. The others fanned out behind him, faces shadowed, guns loose in their holsters. They weren't local. That much was clear. The first man grinned as they slowed to a trot near Clara's fence. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, tilting his hat. Clara didn't answer. She took a step forward, squinting past the sun. "Don't recall sending out any invitations." He chuckled. "Didn't reckon you had to. Just looking for a place to water down. Maybe swap a few stories." Ghost stamped inside the barn. Clara glanced toward the sound, then back at the men. "Ain't got stories," she said. "And I sure as hell don't have water for thieves." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Now that's not neighborly. He swung off his horse and walked toward her with the lazy arrogance of someone used to getting his way. "Name's Jeb Crowley. You heard of me." She gave no sign she had. Jeb's smile twitched. "We're passing through," he said. "But I seen that horse of yours from the ridge. Fine animal. Looks army-bred." "He is." Jeb nodded, looking toward the barn. "Well, I think he'd ride just fine with the Red Dust Riders." Clara's eyes narrowed. "He ain't for sale." "I wasn't a-skinned." The moment cracked like thunder. Clara's hand went for her side, but she had no weapon there, just habit and defiance. Jeb saw it, grinned wider, then whistled sharp. 2 men dismounted and stormed the barn. She ran, but one of them caught her by the arm and shoved her down into the dirt. By the time she stood, Ghost was screaming, fighting his halter as they dragged him out. Clara shouted, voice raw, "You don't know what you're talking." Jeb Crowley turned in the saddle, now seated on Ghost, and said, "Lady, I reckon I do." Then they rode off, taking the wind with them. By dusk, the town had gathered near the saloon, drawn by the noise and Clara's hollow-eyed arrival. Dust coated her clothes, and blood traced down her cheek, where she'd hit the post. Sheriff Amos Cullen leaned against the rail, arms crossed, mouth full of tobacco and disinterest. "Just a horse, Clara," he muttered when she demanded he ride after them. "They didn't shoot you, didn't torch the barn. Count yourself lucky." "Ghost is all I have," she said. The sheriff shrugged. "Law says they're long gone. Best you let it lie." People muttered, some awkward, some curious. No one offered help. No one met her eyes. She turned without a word and walked back through the dust, every step slower than the last. The ranch was too quiet without Ghost. The barn a hollow shell. That night, Clara sat alone at her kitchen table, oil lamp flickering, an old photograph in her hands. It showed her and James, younger then, him in his uniform, her in trousers, and a cavalry coat too big for her shoulders. They were smiling. They were always smiling back then. The next morning, Clara didn't come into town. nor the morning after. On the third day, smoke curled from the chimney again. A boy from the feed store rode by and spotted her in the yard, splitting wood in her dead husband's coat. That night, she opened the old chest beneath the floorboards. Inside were remnants of a life buried deep. A cavalry-issued Colt revolver, still oiled and clean. A sawed-off shotgun with a walnut stock. A small pouch of cartridges. And at the very bottom, wrapped in oilskin, her badge. Worn and bent, but unmistakable. Clara stared at it for a long time, then set it aside. The next morning, she saddled the old mule she kept for cart work, a stubborn beast named Whiskey. It would be slow going, but she'd never planned on fast. As she mounted up, she paused at the edge of her yard, looked back at the ranch, and touched the gatepost once with her fingertips. Then she rode west, following the tracks Ghost left behind. They had taken her horse, and now she would take everything else. The desert did not welcome travelers. It watched them, burned them, tested their resolve. Clara McKenna rode into it without ceremony, clothed in dust and silence. The sun clung low in the sky, bleeding across the red hills, shadows stretching like fingers, trying to pull her back. But there was nothing behind her worth staying for. Not anymore. Whiskey, the mule, plodded without complaint, his ears twitching at every gust of wind. Clara rode light, 2 canteens, a rifle across her lap, and the Colt resting snug at her hip. She had no illusions about what waited ahead. The Red Dust Riders weren't the kind to apologize and make amends. Men like Jeb Crowley carved their legacies out of fear, not forgiveness. She tracked them by hoof marks and broken shrubs, signs most would miss, but that spoke plainly to Clara. She had learned to read the land the same way her husband had taught her to read men, with patience, with calculation. Every detail meant something. A bent weed, a fresh pile of dung, a half-buried boot print pressed deeper on one side, the weight of a man carrying stolen pride. On the second day, she came upon a ravaged homestead. The wind whistled through a door that hung crooked on rusted hinges. The place had been quieted in haste, chairs overturned, food rotting in a spilled sack. Clara called out, but got only silence in return. Then a whisper, faint, from beneath the floorboards. She found the boy under a loose plank. 10, maybe 11, pale as parchment and shaking like a leaf in a storm. She coaxed him out with soft words and the promise of jerky. He clung to her for a moment before letting go. Riders came through, he said. Took Pa's rifle. Beat him bad when he tried to stop him. Clara scanned the room. Where's your mother? Buried her after last frost. The boy muttered. It's just us now. Pa can't walk. They broke his leg. She left them a sack of food and her extra canteen. Before she left, she knelt by the boy and looked him in the eye. Your father's a brave man, she said. He stood when others didn't. The boy nodded, but his lip trembled. You gonna stop them? Clara didn't smile. I'm gonna end them. That night, the wind carried a different kind of cold. Clara made camp beneath a crumbling rock face, the stars sharp as nails in the black sky. She laid her duster over Whiskey's back and sat cross-legged beside a dwindling fire. From the satchel strapped to her saddle, she pulled out a folded piece of cloth, yellowed with age, edges fraying. A faded photograph, not of James. This one went further back. In it, Clara stood in front of a painted tent, rifle in hand, grinning like the world owed her nothing. The words Clara Clay, the sure shot of the Silver West, were scrawled across the canvas behind her in looping letters. She had once been a spectacle, a gunslinger in skirts, performing for the drunk and dazzled. She could hit a coin tossed in the air, split a rope from 30 paces, shoot through a spinning ring while riding full gallop. Folks clapped. Some laughed. Others whispered. A woman who could shoot better than most men? It didn't sit right with some, but it made her money. She left that life behind when she met James. He taught her to shoot not for show, but for truth, for defense, for honor. Together, they'd worked Pinkerton cases, bounty hunting the worst kinds of men. She'd seen towns burn and necks swing, and somewhere in all that, she'd grown tired of the weight her own name carried. So she buried Clara Clay and became Clara McKenna, a rancher's wife. But out here, the name didn't matter. Only the aim. By the fourth day, she caught up to them. Their tracks veered north into canyon country, tight passes and high ledges, the kind of place made for ambushes. The riders had grown careless. Maybe they figured no one would follow. Maybe they thought a mule couldn't make the climb. They were wrong on both counts. She kept her distance at first, watching from high rock, as they made camp below. 7 men, including Jeb. They lounged around a fire, drinking, laughing. Ghost stood tied near the edge of the camp, skittish but unharmed. Clara's jaw tightened. She watched Jeb throw back his head and howl at something one of the others said. Arrogant bastard. But she didn't move. Not yet. She waited until dawn painted the canyon walls in blood. That morning, one of the riders broke off from the group to relieve himself away from camp. Clara was already waiting behind the boulder. She pressed the barrel of the Colt to his neck before he even knew she was there. "Make a sound," she whispered, "and it'll be your last." He raised his hands. Young, barely more than a boy. Filthy pale. He stank of whiskey and sweat. "Where they headed?" she asked. I don't know. Just west. Jeb don't tell us much." "You with them long?" He hesitated. 3 months. Clara studied him. His boots were too big. The belt barely fit. "Not a killer, not yet. You go back to Raven Hollow," she said. "Take the South Ridge. Ride till you hit the river. If you're lying, I'll find you." He nodded fast and ran like the devil himself was on his heels. She watched until he was gone. That left 6. She spent the rest of the day laying her trap, remembering the old ways. She rigged a section of trail with dry brush and oil-soaked cloth. She scouted the canyon for choke points and escape routes. By dusk, she had a plan. But she needed one more thing: courage. Not the loud kind, but the quiet, bone-deep kind that holds its breath and pulls the trigger anyway. She found it when she looked at Ghost. That night, just after moonrise, she crept into the canyon, her footsteps silent as a prayer. She carried no torch, no sound, just the weight of justice and a shotgun across her back. She would wait for dawn to strike. But vengeance, that waited for no light at all. Red Devil's Ridge rose from the earth like a rusted blade, jagged and cruel. The canyon walls burned red in the morning light, bleeding shadow and heat into every crevice. It was a place whispered about in passing, a hideaway for desperate men and dying promises. Clara McKenna stood on the overlook, eyes narrowed, watching the camp below. The riders had grown comfortable. Their fire smoked lazy into the morning air, and their laughter echoed too loud for men on the run. Ghost stood tethered near a rock, his head low, sides heaving. Clara could see the welts on his flank, the dried sweat crusting his coat. Her hands curled tight around her rifle stock. She didn't feel the wind anymore. 6 men. She counted twice. Jeb Crowley lounged in a camp chair like a king in exile, boots propped on a crate, shirt open, a bottle swinging from one hand. The others were scattered, one tending the fire, 2 dicing near the tent, another nodding off against a saddle. The 6th was sharpening a knife, slow and idle. Clara moved like a whisper between the rocks, every step deliberate. She wore James's duster, now dulled to a clay brown, and a bandolier slung across her chest. In her belt, the Colt gleamed like a forgotten truth. The shotgun was cradled in her arms, already loaded. She began with the horses. They were tied at the far edge of camp, half asleep and half starved. Clara crept among them, whispering soft and steady, easing the ropes off one by one. Her scent, familiar and calm, kept them still. She slapped a mare on the rump, and it took off. The others followed. By the time the 3rd horse bolted, one of the riders shouted, "What the hell?" The camp exploded with movement. Clara was already behind the supply crates, shotgun aimed. The nearest man ran straight into her line of fire. She squeezed the trigger. The blast echoed across the canyon, and he dropped like a sack of grain. No time for a scream. Panic fractured the camp. Jeb rose cursing, his pistol in hand, eyes scanning wildly. Clara moved fast, ducking behind a wagon and reloading. Another rider stumbled into view. She shot again. He spun and fell, twitching in the dirt. "Clara goddamn McKenna." Jeb shouted, voice rising like a storm. "You got some nerve." She stood tall from behind the crates, Colt drawn now, her face lit by the rising sun. "You stole from me," she said. Jeb laughed once, short and bitter. "You came all this way for a horse." Clara fired. The bullet punched through the shoulder of the man crouched beside him. He screamed, dropped his rifle, and curled on the ground. "I came for what's mine," she said, advancing, "and for what you did to that boy's father, and the others you left bleeding." Two of the remaining riders turned tail and ran, scrambling up the ridge, without looking back. Clara didn't follow. Cowards would carry their shame longer than any wound she could give. Jeb moved behind a wagon, taking cover, his revolver snapping off 2 wild shots. One tore through Clara's sleeve, hot and close. She dropped low, rolled, and came up behind the tent. He didn't see her until she was already there. She stepped from the flap like a ghost, pressed the muzzle of her Colt to his temple. "Drop it," she said. Jeb froze. Then he turned, slowly, eyes narrowing. "You really think you're going to get out of here clean?" "I'm not looking for clean," Clara said. "I'm looking for done." But she didn't shoot. Instead, she reached down, yanked the revolver from his grip, then cracked him across the face with the butt of her gun. He dropped, groaning, blood pouring from his split lip. "Strip," she ordered. "What?" "Your boots. Your saddle. Your pride. Take him off." He stared, disbelief flickering into fury. "I'll kill you for this," he spat. "No," Clara said. "You won't." One by one, she made him remove them all, until he stood in his long johns and socks, shaking with rage. Then she tied his hands behind his back, mounted Ghost, and looked down at him from the saddle. "You walk out of here barefoot," she said. "Let every town between here and Raven Hollow see what's left of the man who thought he could steal from a widow." He snarled something low and ugly. Clara didn't respond. She just turned Ghost and rode past the wreckage of the camp, where the dying groaned and the cowardly hid. She left them with the dust, the vultures, and their regrets. By the time she reached the ridge, she could see the land stretching out ahead, endless and empty. The wind rose again, tugging at her coat, lifting her hair. She breathed in slow, steady. It was over, but she knew better than to believe it would be forgotten. The trail back to Raven Hollow felt different. The land hadn't changed, but Clara had. Ghost moved beneath her with the steadiness of an old friend. No longer a stolen prize, but a returned piece of herself. The morning light brushed the canyon walls behind her, and for the first time in days, the wind didn't feel like a threat. It felt like applause. She didn't ride fast. Vengeance had come and gone, and in its place was something heavier, quieter. She'd taken Jeb Crowley's power, not with a bullet, but with humiliation. Word would spread. It always did. The tale of the widow who rode alone into Red Devil's Ridge and brought the riders low. Men would argue the details, embellish the firelight version, but they'd remember the truth, even if they never said it aloud. Clara McKenna was not to be trifled with. By the time she reached the outskirts of town, curious eyes peered from behind windows and saloon doors. Clara didn't stop. She rode Ghost straight down Main Street, her hat low, her coat stained with dust and sweat, the battered Colt still resting easy at her hip. Behind her, a silence followed, reverent, uncertain. Sheriff Cullen met her outside the jailhouse, arms folded, eyes wary. He took one look at the blood on her cuff, the calm in her gaze, and swallowed whatever lecture he'd been building. "You bring trouble with you, Clara," he said. "No," she answered. "I sent it limping the other way." He glanced past her, hoping to see a posse or prisoners. He saw none. "Crowley, alive," she said. "Mostly. He'll be walking the long road home with no saddle, no boots, and no name worth cursing." The sheriff didn't smile, but his lips twitched. "Suppose that's justice, then?" "It'll have to be." He stepped aside without asking more. Clara rode to her ranch, just as the sun dipped behind the hills. The barn stood silent, the gate still slightly open from the day she left. She dismounted, ran her hand down Ghost's neck, and walked him into his stall. He didn't fight her this time. He knew he was home. In the house, everything was just as she'd left it. The table, the empty chair, the untouched tin of coffee. She lit the lamp and sat with her hands folded, The badge lay in front of her, still bent from where she'd hidden it all those years ago. She picked it up, turned it over once, then tucked it into a drawer. That part of her was finished. Outside, the stars crept out one by one, bold against the velvet dark. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, not in hunger, but recognition. There would be talk, she knew. Some would fear her now. Others would look to her, ask her to take up the badge again, to chase down every devil that rode through the territory. But she wasn't theirs to summon. She hadn't done this for law or glory. She'd done it because they'd taken what was hers. Clara stepped out onto the porch and looked toward the horizon. The land stretched wide and quiet before her. She could stay. She could hang her hat for good, mend fences, break horses, let the legend harden into myth. But the road had its own voice, and it whispered of others like her, folks standing alone against wrong with nothing but grit and a steady aim. Maybe one day, someone else would need a rider like her. She turned back inside, packed light, just as she had days ago. This time, though, she left the door unlatched. By sunrise, she was gone again, and behind her, the dust rolled on, telling a story the wind would never let die.